So I'm Sarah Fuller from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I get to moderate this great panel on supporting adult well-being for a thriving workforce. And first up, we're going to have presenters. We have Jonathan Eisler from the California Department of Education and Sharif El-Mekki, the founder and CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. And then we're going to have a great panel with a set of educators who I will introduce and let introduce themselves as we move to that part.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so I'm Jonathan Eisler. I'm from the California Department of Education. Thank you so much for having me here again. We were here last year. Great to come back again. I learned a lot yesterday. I'm already kind of thinking about new things. And I also really thought, yesterday was about the students, today's about the adults, but nothing is in isolation, right? Like we can't think about the students without thinking about the adults and vice versa. So just keep that in the larger context when we're talking about what we're going to talk about today. I am part of a project which is called a practitioner partnership to improve pandemic recovery efforts in California. I'll introduce members of our team in a few slides here, but it is a 3-year-long, $3 million IES grant. We're part of the Restart Network team. And this project is looking at COVID recovery, obviously, but there's kind of different prongs. There's a qualitative prong, there are quantitative prongs. One of the pieces of the qualitative prongs is really looking at a lot about student performance and student recovery in terms of the pandemic recovery and school climate, but there is also a piece of that research that's looking at adults, administrators, teachers, counselors, everyone involved in the school ecosystem. So that's really one of the pieces of our approach is looking at kind of doing a survey of schools and districts. We actually have the second round of that survey going out just this week. It just went out on Monday, so wish us luck that we get a good response rate. The quantitative piece of this is we're also looking at student performance in terms of test scores, in terms of chronic absenteeism, all of the usual kind of those types of metrics. And we're focusing on differences between kind of rural and urban outcomes and different contexts, which we'll talk a little bit about today, maybe a little bit later if we have time. We're looking very much at socio-emotional learning, but we're looking at kind of 3 levels, right? We're looking at the macro level, like what are the things that are happening at the national and state level to kind of influence recovery. We're looking at that meso level because with, like a lot of states, you have a system, multi-tiered system of support where you have the state, but then that's supporting the counties, that's supporting the districts, that's supporting the schools. So it's this very much all along the way, but of course information travels in both directions, right? So information gathered in the classroom level goes to the school, goes to the district, et cetera. So it's this very much kind of thing that's happening organically together. One of the things that we've looked at in our survey is what are some of the things that are we doing as a state collectively to help retain good teachers, right? So obviously one of the things is more compensation. This is not going to be something that's unique to California. That is a strategy that a majority of our districts are involved with. Over 50% of them are doing that. A lot of them are dedicating specifically time and resources to professional development. A lot of the districts, roughly half, also demonstrated that they were specifically looking at improving teaching and learning environments. And then you kind of drop off in terms of the strategies of the different districts, what they're doing. But one of the things is just trying to start that hiring process earlier and then also providing career ladders. That's really important, right? If you have just an entry-level teacher, there's no career ladder, or there's no kind of there's no appearance of a career ladder, it's very hard to retain teachers, right? And then also, because of not only the pandemic, but even pre-pandemic, just hiring from non-traditional sources. That's something that the different districts have been trying for many years now, even pre-pandemic. That's something that has, in some ways, stayed the same within the pandemic context. This slide really does a good job of illustrating some of the differences between rural and urban settings. So obviously compensation, which is that bottom row right there, that's something that both rural and urban districts are approaching. But we are finding that basically rural districts are more likely to use that as a strategy for teacher retention. And if you go up towards the top, that second row, taking steps towards improving the environment of the school site itself is you're more likely to see the rural districts gearing towards that strategy. We thought it was interesting that that kind of flipped a little bit when you looked at the career ladder strategy, and then also strategies like bringing in non-traditional providers and offering like loan repayment as incentives for retention, where the urban areas have kind of a little bit higher use of those strategies. So at the state level, there's only so much that we can do, right? And we do everything that we can to support the counties and the districts. Some of them that we're going to mention here, and you can go to the website if you want to check them out, is obviously financial incentives, right? So we do have what's called the Golden State Teacher Program, which offers up to $20,000 to students, not K-12 students, but obviously post-secondary students that want to pursue a teaching degree, and they're earning their teaching or pupil services, personnel services credentials. That's an incentive to be able to get them towards making it into the teacher ranks. We have this TEACH program, which offers $4,000 per year to students who intend to work in primary, secondary schools that serve students from low-income families. And then we also have specific incentives towards early education grants. In California, we just recently added kind of expanding the TK, the transitional kindergarten program. So obviously we were projecting a very big need in terms of TK teachers and early education teachers. So there are a variety of grants aimed specifically towards early education teachers. The CDE, California Department of Education, we've entered into multiple formal data sharing agreements with different research partners. And I just want to point out that a lot of the research that is done in the state, it's done completely independently, so that people kind of approach us, so they ask for data, we review their concept papers and either approve or reject them based on merits, based on qualifications of the research team. These are just an example, a handful of examples of projects that we've partnered with different teams. And what's really nice about these projects, they're looking at the problem of teacher retention and teacher recruitment within the state from different angles, but a lot of them are looking at it very, very institutionally, like what are the kind of institutional factors that lead people into the teaching profession, what's leading to burnout, what's leading to all these things. So they are looking at kind of institutional level factors, but also since we're sharing the individual teacher level data as well as some student level data in some cases, they can look at differences in terms of demographics, in terms of male and female teachers, in terms of older and younger teachers, in terms of the racial ethnic composition of the teaching workforce. So they're able to drill down much more, so not just looking at geography and things like that, but looking at all sorts of different structural influences that are impacting the state. One other thing I just wanted to mention, our previous superintendent was focused very much on expanding the role of bilingual education in the state, so there are also incentives to making sure that there are resources available for teachers that want to or who can provide bilingual education, and there's also financial and non-financial incentives. And then there's also been a very concerted effort under our current superintendent to expand opportunities for teachers of color, in particular black and brown teachers. And our current superintendent has very much focused on expanding outreach and recruitment of male teachers of color, because we know, and I think probably everyone in the room knows that when students see teachers that look a lot more like them in their communities, there's much more of a connection between the student and the environment, the learning environment. It's going to lead to lower chronic absenteeism. It's going to increase performance across different areas. So that's something else that our superintendent is attempting to do through different policies. Again, it's, I think every state that's here knows that teacher retention, teacher recruitment is a really, really big problem. It's become probably worse in many contexts because of COVID. But I know that from talking to other states, trying out different experiments. I mean, one of the things I really enjoyed about yesterday's panel was talking about this whole 150, 200 years of education has been an experiment. This, we got to experiment together here. So this is kind of a space where these kind of things are needed. We know that we need to improve teacher retention. I just want to do quick acknowledgments, and then I'll pass it along. But the team itself, the California research team, led by New, who's in the corner over there, as the PI of the project, and then we work with Julian Betts at the University of California, San Diego. We work with Bruce Fuller at UC Berkeley, Laura Hill and Julian LaFortune at PPIC, the Public Policy Institute Institute of California, and then Thomas Pearson also works with me at California Department of Education. And of course, we do all of this with the help of the IES grant. There's our grant number up there. So hopefully I'm on time, and thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here. Sharifa, it sounds like I missed a great session yesterday. Sharifa Mekki, I was a teacher and principal for 26 years, all in West Philadelphia, and my principalship was all in turnaround schools. And the last 11 was in a charter, turnaround charter in the community I grew up in. Want to kind of really focus in on, we started the Center for Black Educator Development to work with folks to rebuild a national Black teacher pipeline. We recognize that has always been critical in our communities. It's getting more airplay nationally and in other sectors, but many families over generations can say that they notice a difference when their Black child had a Black teacher. And now we're starting to see the research around that. So I want to try to connect the dots between this well-being and the existence of Black teachers in that space and what that means. In particular, when we think about rebuilding the Black teacher pipeline, we've been looking at it from the entire pipeline more in a comprehensive way. There are a lot of peers who are focusing on one thing or the other. We really look at recruitment and retention from high school students who are starting to think about what they want to do with career pathways, all the way to veteran educators and how they're thinking about their experiences. And so with this pipeline, how we've been really looking at is like retention starts early on. When someone is entering the field, they're already thinking about, is this a place for me long term? Or am I really just here for whatever finite window? And so we really try to think about how do we provide support from beginning to end across the spaces. I'm going to juxtapose this a little bit to maybe non-Black, particularly white teachers, white women teachers that we've spoken with, to see like how that contradicts. One small example. First started being very interested in this work when I was at the U.S. Department of Ed as a principal ambassador fellow back in the Arnie, Duncan, John King time frame. And we had to do a capstone project. My capstone project was around Black men in education. About 1.3% of the public school teachers are identified as Black men. And we recognized, so it ended up being 17 of us that we were like supporting, mentoring. They were from all over the country. They were all working in Philadelphia, all, highly effective, master's degree and above, relatively handsome brothers, all the works. And what we recognized that not a single one of us had been invited into the profession until after we had graduated from college. And so that was like one of the first things that that struck us, that we all had this same story, even though we were, from all over. And when the first research, that we wanted, we don't have an ID number or anything like that. No grant came with it. However, we asked our colleagues, most of them were white women, and the average response for when they were invited into the profession to be a teacher was third grade. So you have third grade for one group, post-bac for another group, right? And so right there, even if someone makes it in, they're already wondering, am I really wanted here? Particularly when you parallel that to the stories of, we're also here to police children, or, some kind of cultural thing. So I wasn't invited, and then when I do get invited, it's like, hey, suspend those kids or control those kids or, monitor those kids in that kind of way. So I would just give that as kind of a side to kind of share like how we're thinking about it as an ecosystem and kind of comprehensively of how this all goes. But also then what are the supports that can be placed while a student is in high school, while they're matriculating through college, and then what does the early career teaching pathway look like for us? And one of the reasons, when I first started teaching in '93, was a whole lot of talk about multiculturalism. And, we see, fast forward now, there's, anti, everything, pretty much the rules today. And the one thing I want to caution, in particular when you're talking about, Black teachers, that you can talk about multiculturalism, you can have interventions, but if you're not specifically thinking about the Black experience in America, you may miss the boat. So this is data from Philadelphia, a very diverse city. I think the Black population overall is like 40-something% in the city. So very diverse. And we see over 20 years, from 2000 to 2020, a loss of 1,200 Black teachers. In that same time frame, there were small upticks in other numbers and percentages of teachers. And the overall numbers of teachers has remained stagnant. So it's not like we had this massive drop in teachers or anything like that. But to have 1,200 fewer Black teachers means that there's something particular about the Black experience in America that people are just not only unaware of, but consciously ignoring. And one of the things that we caution schools and districts as we're doing, our trainings and our technical assistance is, as you're thinking about retention and well-being and what this means, there's some folks who also are experiencing what does it mean to be Black in America. And there are a lot of similarities between that and being Black in American schools. And if we only think about the school aspect, we are missing a whole lot of racial stress that people are carrying with them into it. And when we talk to Black educators around the country, they're sharing with us over and over and over again. And the consistency across the country about this experience means that there's something that really needs to be paid attention to. And so when they're sharing, they're saying like, so now I'm experiencing professionalized racial bias. When I was younger, they just called it racism. But, these days it's racial bias, it's microaggressions, all these fancy words for racism. So I'm gonna just use the words I grew up with, all right? So they're experiencing professionalized racism, meaning they're seeing it in there from the hiring to the questioning, to the belittling, to the, are you smart enough to lead a classroom type of thing in a professional setting. But they're also remembering their experience as students, and sometimes in these same chairs, that they may not have had language for. But now they're connecting the dots. Oh, when that principal said this is what they were saying, this is what they were meaning. But the third part of this trifecta is now they're trying to either protect or rationalize policies that they don't agree with. Policies that may have oppressed them when they were students. So they're experiencing it themselves as professionals. They're remembering their childhood as students and across the 13 years. And now they're in front of often children who look like them. And they're either trying to protect them or rationalize why they have to continue, to advocate for this policy that they believe is racist and anti-Black. All that's before lesson planning, grading, relationship building, data analysis. All of that is before then. And so often we're thinking about just that one part, which is important, grading, and how much does a teacher have to do during the day, and what's the the amount of students or in their caseload. All of those things are usually what we're focusing on. And I would encourage us to also look at what is the racial stress that's embedded with that, but also distinct from that as the role of a teacher. And then lastly, I just want to share, typically when I, talked about our white teacher colleagues, and we were, learning from what was their journey in. And it often looked like, this, they were interested, they went to a university, often, whether they had loans or not, we see that there's disparity between the amount of loans like Black teachers carry and other teachers, right? And so, we can't recruit and retain and be separated from the racial, social, economic realities that educators are facing, particularly educators of color, right? So we're trying to recruit and retain, but we're not even thinking about what does it mean for an Indigenous educator to be in the space? What does it mean to recruit a Black man to become a teacher? And not even thinking about, wait a minute, they may be the only Black man in their ed prep program through undergrad and for their masters. And we're like, oh, we don't care. We're not even thinking of it. We're oblivious to that, but we're like, oh, we want more Black men to enter. Like, what does that actually mean for a Black man to be in a university classroom all that time as an 18-year-old to 22-year. Maybe they came from a diverse school. I keep hitting this microphone, sorry. So what does that mean? And so what I just want to remind us is to often the default is what we've experienced. And if 80% of public school teachers are white, that means the ecosystem is typically going to be even higher percentage. And then we may be disconnected from the realities that other people are facing as we say we want to recruit and retain. And so listening to these educators, being proactive, not just waiting for them to tell, but actually being very curious about what is the experience that they have entering into the field. This is, probably too small for many of you to read, but you'll have this deck. But these are just quotes from people's experiences around the country, Black educators who are sharing, here's what I experienced that I'm not seeing being connected to recruitment or retention or well-being. Here I attended the HBCU and I felt, valued. I felt, that people were looking out for me, that people understood me. And now I'm in a system that could care less, couldn't care less. And so what does that mean if we're saying, the well-being? And the same thing when we're doing development with principals who are, SEL has been this big rage as of late, both the anti-SEL as well as people who want to implement it. And we've been fascinated is the wrong word, but if it wasn't so important, it would be fascinating. Right now it's like, depressing a little bit. How many people are unaware that racial stress is part of social emotional development? Not only for adults, but for children. We can't talk about social emotional learning if we can't talk about positive racial identity. And the fact that we want to pursue social emotional learning for all these youth, and we don't even think about, okay, what does it take to develop positive racial identity development for a Black child in our school or in our school system? But we're talking about social emotional learning. You can't separate that. So, so I'll end there and just really hoping that we think about what does it mean to think about retention in a space that we're looking for racial justice as a part of educational justice, and recognizing that they're inextricably linked. And you can't pursue educational justice without achieving racial justice. The same way that you can't pursue racial justice without thinking about educational justice. So I'll end there. And if you're not part of the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign, which a lot of this is starting to percolate, I encourage you to take a look at it, and it'll be in the slides once those are shared out. Thank you.
Thank you for those great presentations. Now I'm going to introduce briefly our panelists, but then before we sort of dive into questions, I'd like to give you each a chance to say a little bit about who you are and what your context is that you're coming to this from. So we have Leanne Wenzel, who's the superintendent of schools for Ridley School District. Shem Bevel, the principal of Bayside 6th grade campus. Wendy Turner, a 3rd grade teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. And Tiago Baltazar, I'm sorry if I'm messing up names, who serves as an MTSS consultant at Berrien Regional Education Service Agency. So can we go down the line and have each of you just say briefly who you are and where you're coming from?
So I am Leanne Wenzel. I am in my 34th year in the school district, my 14th as superintendent. Ridley School District is not far from here. It's a 2-hour train ride. I'm actually probably about halfway between Wendy and Sharif, because I am in suburban Philadelphia, south of the city, but 8 miles north of Delaware. Our district is a K-12 district with about 5,800 students in Delaware County, PA. There are 15 school districts in Delaware County. We are the second largest with the 5,800, but I am in a district that is 7 3/4 square miles. So we are densely populated, hence the reason we have 15 school districts in Delaware County. Our demographics have shifted over the time that I've been in the district. We currently sit with about 38% of our students classified as students of color. And our socioeconomic, we're about 52 to 54% eligible for free and reduced lunch.
Having a Beyonce moment. Okay, I'm Sham Bavell, and I'm actually a middle school principal from Virginia Beach, the fourth largest division in Virginia. When I say middle school, my school is just a little different. I only have sixth graders. Knew I would get you. I have almost 400 11 and 12-year-olds in every nook and cranny in my building. And so for my demographic, I have about 60% African American, 17% Hispanic for my predominant cultures. And my kids have quite a few transitions. Right now, we're at about 70% free and reduced, but as you know, a lot of parents do not fill out our paperwork, so I'm sure it's closer to 92, 93%, to be honest. For my school, like I said, it's just sixth graders, but our kids actually transition from first a K through 1 school, then they move to 2 to 3, and then they move 4 to 5, and then they come to me, and then they move to 7, 8, and then they finally get to a normal high school for 4 years. So in hearing all of that, I'm sure you can imagine how important the wellness is not only for our kids, but for my staff who have 1 year to make sure that our kids feel like that they belong. And our teachers, our staff, they're miracle workers. So, and the other unique thing about our school is none of the kids in the neighborhood go to my school. Our school is completely out of the community. All of our kids are bused in except for about 22 that parents drop off. So I have mostly bus riders. So you can just imagine when you put all of these things together in this cute kit and caboodle, all of the things that we have to do at my school. So it's very important at my school that we make sure the staff feel that they're heard, they're seen, they're valued. And honestly, more than anything, what I think is supporting their wellness is that they're having fun. Just getting away from a lot of the typical things and just kind of making them feel like that we're all family. So, I mean, I could talk more about that a little later when we talk about it, but from my teachers, what I've heard that they have valued the most is having time. So we make sure that they have unencumbered time, and I also like to give them comp time as well because they work like nobody's business. If I could, I would give them all $1 million, but I can't. And to be honest, when it comes to compensation, that's not a conversation that I hear from my veteran teachers. It's more of what I hear from my newer teachers, my younger teachers. The veteran teachers, they just show up, they do what they're supposed to do, and help the others grow, but I honestly don't hear a lot of that. So we do a lot in our school to support their wellness, making sure that their voice is incorporated in what we do, making sure that we're always listening to their ideas and things like that, and that they're getting the praise and acknowledgement that they deserve. And when we have functions at our school, it's not just for students. My staff brings their families as well. So we make it like this is all of us. And when you do that, the students see staff differently, staff sees kids differently, and it kind of creates this family atmosphere where we just kind of exist, have a good time, and people show up. I just wanted to bring up just really quickly that absenteeism is also influenced by teacher absenteeism, which happens when the wellness just isn't where it needs to be. But I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a little bit.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Wendy Turner. I'm a third grade teacher in suburban Wilmington, Delaware. I'm also an author and a teacher leader. My area of passion and expertise is social emotional learning. I have been a teacher for 14 years. I was a career changer, going to school at night to get my master's degree in elementary ed, and I started teaching when I was 40 years old. I've taught through COVID. I've lived it. I am tired. Yesterday, when we had the chance to express what our superpower would be, I said, I would like to not be tired. That would be my superpower. I may be a poster child for burnout. At the conclusion of the 2021 to 2022 school year, I left the classroom. And it broke my heart to do so, but I knew I was facing significant burnout and I had to do something about it. I was saying and sounding different to my family and close friends, and they kept asking me, are you okay? And every time someone asked me, are you okay versus how are you, I knew that was like a signal to me. So I left and I taught college for a semester. Teaching college for a semester is a wonderful job. It is not the job for me. So I left teaching college after a semester, and then I decided to stay in education. I subbed. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life to sub in elementary schools in the district where I'd worked for 12 years. I then started working as a tutor part-time, and I wrote a book on adult social emotional learning, hoping to put a resource out there in the world because that's a key part of any SEL system, and I don't think that we're doing it the right way. We don't know how to do it, and so I just wanted to create a resource to help people build skills that could help them navigate the job and enjoy their time with their students and in their personal lives more. I teach, our school is a Title I suburban school. It has a Spanish immersion program. I teach in a third grade inclusion classroom. I've taught either second or third grade for all the time that I've been a teacher. So I've loved everything I've heard. I'm listening and learning today with everyone, and it's an honor, and I appreciate being here just so much. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good morning. So yeah, lovely to be here as well. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'm coming from Southwest Michigan, where I work at a RESA, or Regional Education Service Agency. I'm an MTSS consultant there, multi-tier system of support. And I'm also a Castle Fellow from before, an alum, I guess how I got to where I'm at and why I'm interested in adult SEL is because I'm a former school psychologist. That's how I got into the field. I did that for 10 years, loved it, but also grew really frustrated. And the reason why I got frustrated was simply because here we are again having an IP meeting or writing a behavior plan or whatever it may be. And we are asking the adults to do things with and for the students that they just don't have the skills to do. They are not able to carry on whatever plans we come up with. And it became really obvious. We ended up creating an SEL Academy after school for teachers. And at one point, a principal came to us, I think session 4 or 5, and said, you know what? I have lost 15 pounds as a result of coming to this. And we're like, what? That's not one of the outcomes we were trying to achieve, right? But I think it was telling of what we were starting to tap into, which was teacher well-being and educator well-being in general. So I shift departments. I stayed at the same organization, but I moved from special ed to gen ed to work with the adults and to try to build these skill sets and be able to create a better environment so that the adults can do what they're there for. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you all. So just for the 4 panelists here, as you are hearing and sort of reacting to the presentation, were there things you heard during the presentation that affirmed what you've experienced in your context, or things that surprised you and provoked further thought? And I'm going to have us go down the road so everybody react.
I can't say I've been surprised at the research, having worked in this profession for a long time. I know when I was, prior to this position, I was in the HR position in my district as an assistant superintendent. So in 2005, I started to see some shifting of the demographics within our district, and knew we did not have the staff that reflected students that were coming to our district. And we needed to really focus on what do we need to change and how do we get to that point. And as Sharif said, you know, it's not just about recruitment, it is about retention as well as then the well-being of those staff members. So as we started that process, we shifted and I became a superintendent. I'm happy that my assistant superintendent really understood the mission as to what we were doing. And as I've heard these 2 presentations, you know, it strikes me that this year in 2024, these are the graduates of the pandemic. The high school graduates are graduating college. And part of this group for me, if you can't tell since I've been in the district 34 years, it is all about pipeline in our district. And the pipeline was very white pipeline. And we knew we needed to change that. And we deliberately started a high school program with high school students that would serve as peer mentors. And it wasn't just, captain of the football team or the head cheerleader. It was about making sure we pick students from a variety of backgrounds, and not just the best grade earners, trying to find students that were those leaders for younger students. And we started down this path and then realized this is our gateway into developing our teacher pipeline. And 1/3 of my teaching staff in my district are graduates of our district. And we knew, though, if we wanted a staff to be a better reflection of the students in the district, then we have to start recruiting some of our own students. So I'm happy to report as now that we are having this first round of graduates, 2 of those peer mentors are now going to be on my staff next year. We've already signed a contract and they're in, and one of those 2 students is a student of color. And really working to build that pipeline through a variety, and non-traditional is also another avenue, not just building our own from the student level, but finding those non-traditional entryways into the district. So when we start to stumble upon some people that are coming in for the after-school programming, or they're engaged as a behavior specialist because they have a certain certificate that we can do that, we recruit, and we want to build that pipeline, because for us, that's something that's essential for our district, and it's essential for our leadership pipeline as well. So we are now working with that next iteration, which is to build that administrative pipeline with some of those teachers that are coming up through the system as well.
Thank you. And I think I'd like to speak a little bit to racial stress that I definitely feel like I actually have witnessed and been a part of, even at my school. So I know I mentioned that we have about 60% African American students at my school, but as far as my staffing, I only have about 29% that are instructors or teachers to support that are African American. For my 16% Hispanic teachers, students, I actually have only about 0.04% for Hispanic teachers at my school. And I think what I've seen is that African American teachers feel especially a lot of pressure, because they feel that what they're doing is representing an entire culture when they go into a school. And they sometimes feel like they lose their own individual identity because they're expected to have less referrals, have better teacher-student relationships, less discipline in their classes, which may or may not happen. The expectation a lot of times is that, for example, because you are Black, then you understand the struggle, the strife, the community, the experiences of all Black students, which is not always the case. But a lot of times our teachers don't want to say that they don't always understand and connect. They definitely respect and honor, but they don't always understand because they're not all raised the same, didn't have all the same struggles and challenges. So for a lot of them, they're learning at the same time. And so when they're not asking for that help and asking for that support, they kind of are silent, and they kind of are vulnerable to all of that, all of the things that come with not speaking up and asking for the support. And so they do often leave. And when we hear that we have, an applicant who's African American, everybody's like, oh, there's an African American that's actually applied for the science position. And it's like, come on, people, like that shouldn't be a stop and go thing. It should be the norm. But a lot of that stress is really wearing on a lot of our staff, and we see it all the time. And so part of that is allowing them to have opportunities to get to know the students and learn the students like everyone else. So at my school, we have a mentoring and mentee program, which I know a lot of schools have. And we set it up so that all staff have at least 5 students that they work with throughout the entire year. And so we have regular meetings with kids, and that's how they get to know them. The expectation is that not that you know every child's story before you've actually met them, but that they're given opportunities to learn students, and so that they can kind of share both ways. And I just think kind of eliminating or reducing some of that expectation and stress will really help out a lot. And I can only speak from my experience in my division. That's kind of what I'm saying. And as far as my content teachers, I only have 6 content teachers who who are African American. And for my Hispanic teachers, it's my, of course, I hate to say it, but my foreign language class would be one. And my other, I have a Hispanic special education teacher. So we have teachers that, we don't have a lot when it comes to diversity on our staff, but we have people that love our kids and want to learn our kids, but they have to be given those opportunities.
Something I'd like to say, we're talking about adult well-being, and teachers are tired, but I also think administrators are very tired. And I have an enormous amount of empathy for the administrators on the ground because they have different challenges and problems, but I see the weight on those people as well. So we have to talk about administrators and teachers. And what's enormously clear to me from research I've read recently, as well as listening today, the concept of well-being is not universal. The concept of well-being must be defined locally and individually if we're going to move forward even one step. So we have to think about ways to do that when staff come together at the beginning of the year, and part of someone mapping out what the successful time in a school will look like for them is saying, I need these things to be well, and having the chance to advocate and talk about that. So what I might need to be well is going to be different for someone else, which is going to be different for someone else in a different setting or at a different career stage. So I think we have to think about that. It's not just a simple, we're going to all be well if we do these things. When I found my way back to a classroom this school year, I was really happy because I realized I missed kids. I missed the autonomy of a classroom. I don't know many jobs where you get that. I miss being creative. Really missed that. That was a weird thing that I missed, but that's part of my happiness formula. And then I miss being part of a team. So all those things brought me back to a classroom, and I've just established some boundaries for myself that I keep without exception. And I've committed to myself to find the joy. I love my kids. My kids are third graders. They were in kindergarten on Zoom. So I can still see the impacts to their academics and their maturity level today. So it's not like, oh, we just get these kids and they're done. The impacts will stay with these kids and all of us forever. So I just have to meet them where they are and do my best to connect with them and move them and grow them forward. I do SEL all day, every day, without a curriculum. I don't want a curriculum. A curriculum will stress me out and add to my already full plate. So I know how to do it, but a lot of other people don't know how to do that. My goal is to support the everyday educator with some of those skills and that knowledge, so that's what I'm hoping to do. And one other point I'm thinking about from the presentation about California, I'm wondering what specific moves have been taken to improve teaching conditions, and I see that as more of a strategy in the rural setting, and that's also just something I'm very curious about. Why is that, and what are the moves? I think we're past the point where people think letting teachers wear jeans on Friday is going to help anything. We need real ways to reduce the workload and to allow teachers to be seen, felt, and heard. I do think it's a problem that we have prep that doesn't include trauma-informed practices, SEL, and culturally responsive practices, because if you make a triple Venn diagram with those ideas, right in the middle is where we all feel seen, heard, and validated. So why are we sending teachers into a workforce that don't have that training and that knowledge? And then it's just on administrators or systems to help people get that knowledge. That's what I'm thinking about. Oh, sorry.
We can share. Well, I mean, there's so much there. Something that, in particular, I felt affirmed in hearing these stories. So, starting as a school psych, one of the first schools I had was this high school where 99% of the population, the student population, was black. The faculty was white, and I was new to the country. So I was starting to understand systemic racism and all that goes into it without really any cultural background. And some of the things that I've come to appreciate is we had so many conversations about pipeline. Why don't we have more school psychs that reflect the population that we have here? Well, we don't have them in school either. They're not coming in. And that led into what was brought up. What is this black and brown experience in schools? I think we benefit from the fact that education is such a stable institution, but the stability, with that stability comes a lot of rigidity as well. And invariably, we still have the same structures and ways of doing education as we did 100 years ago. So how do we change that? I live in Southwest Michigan, as I mentioned. It's a fairly conservative county. And if I may, I'll just highlight quickly one of the ways we found success, or starting to find success. So we had to partner with our healthcare provider. They've been doing a really great job with community grand rounds and then developed something called Brave Talks. And Brave Talks was really a very simple way to bring small groups of people together to figure out how does systemic racism impact our community. Because we have plenty of research from the healthcare side of things that it is impacting the social determinants of health. And having that partnership and being able to work together has been a game changer for us. We are now doing this work with school boards that don't believe in this stuff. And yet, because it's education and healthcare, all of a sudden there's a little bit of a cracked door that allows us to start to go into this. So that's something that I felt affirmed in, and that we are trying to be very intentional in looking at what is the experience of Black and brown people in our county, and how do we change that? We get that education is slow to move, and that can be a good thing, but how do we make those changes to make sure that everyone gets the skills they need?
So another question for the panelists. When you think about your work on the presentations, are there things you'd want to know more about or questions you're wondering about?
I can go quickly. I was curious about the question you asked as far as working conditions. So I feel like something I love about Castle is that they highlight the need for learning conditions before we can go into the competencies. Something I like to highlight is, what about the working conditions? What sort of environment are we creating for the adults so that they can develop those competencies? So in the work I do, I tell this to people all the time. This work is really hard because most of us didn't grow up developing these skills. Most of us didn't grow up seeing these skills modeled to us. So we're developing from scratch. So I would love to hear more about the working conditions. And I know not everyone likes to talk about this, but compensation is a big piece as well. How are we looking at compensation? And I do think there's a generational difference. I do agree, older teachers are not talking about compensation as much. Their experience was a little bit different. Younger teachers are, because the needs of the field have changed. And the reason why I would love to have more of a dialogue around compensation is because of bandwidth. It's because of, and I think healthcare gets this, right? Sorry, I'm going to be on my soapbox for a little bit here. I think healthcare gets this, right? Healthcare prioritizes compensation so that you have the bandwidth to perform surgery when you're there. You're not thinking about having your car repaired. You're not thinking about what chores you have to do when you get home. You're not thinking about preparing supper, because in a lot of ways, you can outsource those things if you need to. In education, there's a lot of outsourcing happening as well. But what I've seen is that we're outsourcing the wrong things. And this is when we start going to sites to buy lesson plans or to buy products or whatever it may be. We are doing that as educators, not because we don't know better, but because we don't have enough bandwidth, right? So we have to prioritize. So compensation to me comes in that context, in allowing people to outsource the right things and to be able to be fully dedicated to their profession. All right, off the soapbox, I'll let someone else talk.
No, get back on.
Jim?
Oh, no, I'll tell him to get back on.
So, to piggyback off of both what Wendy and Tiaga said, one of the notes I made, because we had the pleasure of seeing these slides in advance, was workplace expectations. I'm in a very different environment, and I recognize that because I am in an environment that I've been in for a long period of time. And so have a lot of the people that have been in it. So the nature of my organization is very different from a school that has to deal with one and done, right? So we each bring those different contexts to the table, and that also then has to inform you as a district leader, as a building leader, as a classroom teacher, how you're going to fit within this system in order to find those ways in which not just salary, but everything has a price. And when I meet with students, because I do demo interviews with a couple of our high school English classes. And I asked, the salary question. One of the things, and I started doing this when I was in HR, is what do you value? And that has a price tag. And I don't think we have enough of that conversation, especially with we're in the midst of a demographic and generational shift in our workforce in education. I don't know that we've had that conversation with people in terms of put a price tag on your value. Because it was reassuring to me when I'm interviewing a new teacher and they said, where I'm doing my student teacher, it's nice. It's a very well-to-do district. But what I found is it's not necessarily the type of student body I want to work with, nor the type of staff culture I want to experience. So that's why I'm not considering them, because having that impression as to what do you value and then putting a price tag on it can make the difference between someone making a decision that is fulfilling for them to be in a certain environment, regardless of what the conditions are.
My only question is more along the lines of how do we, it was brought up earlier about the non-traditional hires. How can we get away from that? Only because the non-traditional hires, in my experience, are the ones that require the most support, where I'm having to spend more of my time with. I just want to go back to, you got student teaching, you took a praxis because of what you learned, not what you were self-taught. We're spending more time in those pockets instead of with our kids, because we have people who are coming in our school buildings who just do not know. And a lot of the non-traditional hires are people that understand the perks of teaching, like having summers off, and they don't understand. You may miss something in the evening because you may have to go to a student event, or you have to prepare this lesson. Yeah, this lesson may take more than 2 or 3 hours to put together. They don't have that experience. And so the non-traditional hires, at least in my school, it's not working. And it's very desperate, and it's a way to fill our positions, but it's not what our kids need, and it's not supporting the other teachers that are actually in the building. And to be honest, their mental wellness is going to be most vulnerable because they have no idea what it's like to be in a school building. So how do we kind of get away from the non-traditional and get back to the traditional when we talk about retention and support and giving educational people and leaders what they need in order to be successful?
Do the presenters want to respond to any of that?
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. So I'm reeling from everything, and I have too many things to discuss, but I'll try to focus here. So getting back to an earlier comment from Sham, you mentioned the issue of the role of administrators, how important it is. And I think about, the relationship between administrators and teachers is so critically important, right, to everybody's well-being. And it does remind me, getting back to Sharif's comments earlier about looking at the composition of the students all the way up, right, from kindergarten, grade 3, just who do you look like, who do you feel like you can connect with. I think that's also really important between the admin and the teachers, right? So it's not always possible to control that, but to be able to have people of color in particular be in those roles of leadership is so critically important. So from a system level, I think that's obviously something that needs to be encouraged and something that needs to be a focus of everybody. And I also think, Tiago, you mentioned something really interesting, because I actually, before you mentioned social determinants of health, I actually had written down a note to myself that I wanted to talk about this. So previous to being in education, I worked for a few years in the California Department of Public Health, and that's kind of a mantra, right? Like, you go upstream as far as possible. So why does somebody have diabetes? It's not because they ate something a day before, it's because they live in poverty and they don't have access to, they live in a food desert and they don't have access to it. So in other words, you're going as far upstream to kind of determine what the sources of the problems are. And I thought, I don't know if this even exists, but thinking about the stresses that educators have, that administrators have, that superintendents have, that everyone has, so we can start thinking about social determinants of mental health, right? Because it's not just the physical health, and all of us, I think, have been really focusing on the physical health when it comes to COVID. But yesterday, the one thing that really jumped out to me yesterday was everybody's going through mental health stuff, right? I mean, there were all sorts of other wonderful things that we learned from yesterday, but that was, to me, that was the biggest takeaway is here we are, we're 4 years out, but it's rough. And I think the other thing just that also popped to mind, and this really came up when Sharif was talking, and this was also a theme yesterday, is that whereas it's rough for everybody now, it's always been rough for some of these groups, right? It's always been rough for Black and brown communities. It's always been rough for those kids that are being disproportionately targeted for suspensions and things like that. So I'm glad that all of us are paying attention to these things a little bit more now, maybe. But you know, we have to have an acknowledgement that that's historically always been a problem. It just so happens that other communities are now suffering in different ways for COVID. So that was something else that just kind of jumped out at me. I have a bunch of other thoughts, but the other thing I just wanted to mention, Wendy, you had a question about what are things that in California can be done. Compensation is not a silver bullet, but it helps. I think one of the things we're seeing in districts that are being successful or more successful in retaining teachers and recruiting teachers is the fact that they're offering very specific career ladders and opportunities for growth or opportunities for expansion. Maybe it is a generational thing, but I think everybody at different points in their career wants to know that at some point they can progress, right? They're not going to be stagnant. So I think that's something that is, districts in California and throughout the country, if they really want to retain teachers, obviously the compensation is a big thing, being able to offer support from their admins, but then also giving opportunities for professional growth, for personal growth, for career growth. And I also really like the idea you were mentioning about not having all these other things on your mind. And let's face it, teachers as a profession have economic and financial things on their mind that maybe a surgeon or other better compensated professions have. So I've got other stuff, but those are just kind of top of mind things that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, thank you all. I think you all have raised some really important aspects of it, so I'll just touch on a few. This idea of compensation, I love that analogy of like not having to think about certain things. And I also, I connect that to the spending power that our educators, both the college students in particular, as well as veteran educators speak about to us. It's like the difference between having a scholarship up front versus loan forgiveness later. One is going to continue to add stress even in your unconscious. The payment, the paperwork, all of the things as you're trying to do the work. A more, kind of thoughtful and equitable might be pay it up front. If you actually want them to have, that level of stress decrease, it's not the loan forgive. Oh, once you get to X amount of years, then, I remember just as a new teacher, just trying to make sure I learned a profession, was doing it well, that I missed one of the deadlines. And so that means that year I lost out, and I was fortunate because I didn't have a high level, but like that was a chunk of a master's degree, and I can only think of like what that means today with all of the things happening. That's one aspect. I think I hear you on the non-traditional. What I would say, like in Pennsylvania, there's 60% less folks who've actually entered the profession who are interested. So I don't think we're going to get away from the non-traditional. And I would also, really encourage, like HR and talent to make sure that they're getting the right non-traditionals. Because there's, I think making sure people are coming in with their eyes wide open, clearly understood. And even the traditional, Pennsylvania, again, did a study, and it reflects what I saw when I was at the Department of Ed a decade ago. The majority of traditional folks say they were unprepared to teach. And so the tens of thousands of dollars, 4 to 5 years, and then they show up and they say, I'm not prepared to teach anyone. and I'm particularly not prepared to teach Black, brown, and indigenous children. So there's, it's really, a real problem. So not only decrease, but for folks to say that I am unprepared to teach after all of that time. And we're talking about upstream, to me, it's not just who's leading the classroom, it's who prepared you to lead the classroom. And many of them are unprepared to help people who are now leading classrooms of today. I'm talking about college professors and talking about the rigidity, the lack of awareness of what are Black and brown indigenous cultures, what are Black and brown indigenous teaching traditions that would actually help. I did a TED Talk a while ago and said Black teaching traditions can save America, right? Because just understanding better, deeper of like what that could mean, and for a significantly growing number of students of culture, but still being raised on Sigmund Freud, Horace Mann, John Dewey, B.F. Skinner, Blavatsky, whatever his name was, these folks, and then being sent to many of them who couldn't even imagine schools and classrooms full of Black and brown kids, but that's the philosophy that people are steeped in and now being sent to teach. That is counter of like what should actually be happening, but professors are often unaware of like what did Lucy Craft Laney say about teaching in Black communities. What did Carter G. Woodson say about developing teachers and principals to teach in Black communities? If you're unaware of that, how are you? What is your intellectual genealogy that's being passed on? So further upstream means also who's preparing the teachers and leaders, really, of classrooms, schools, and districts. That is a significant issue upstream.
So I want to open it up for audience questions.
I was wondering, my question is for all the panelists, but specifically for Sharif. Are there some, in your work across, thank you, in your work across the country, are there some promising practices or places that you see are making a difference and really starting to increase their percentages of teachers of color? And what are some of the things that you're seeing that they're doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I wish I could say it like district-wide or city-wide. There are some, but what we've seen most often is even when the recruitment numbers go up, attrition numbers are also going up. So that's that's an unfortunate part because, and I think one of the things that we've learned over the past 5 years is many people are reaching out and like, oh, we want teachers of color, we want Black men, we want this, and we want that, and we're telling them we don't have those teachers in our back pockets. What we have is a model for you to grow your own, and interesting students early on, but also starting with retention. The best recruitment plan is a strong retention plan. Right, and many folks are starting with recruitment because it just, I don't know, it sounds more exciting. It's more like, oh, I gotta, but I think often it is because of the challenge that's right in front of them. They have to fill a classroom that fall. Whereas opposed to retention is learn about sustainability, durability, critical thinking, connecting all the dots and not just, oh, how do I fill this one position? So what I would say is those who are doing it better are starting actually with retention. And if you think about it, most districts, if they cut their attrition numbers by half, they won't have a recruitment problem, right? Because it will be less numbers to actually recruit. If they address, retention. Then the other piece I would say that where we have seen, motivating spaces is if you look at a continuum, the more anti-racist it is, the more likely it's going to be a great space, not only for educators of color, but students of color. We did a couple reports with Teach Plus, and one of them focused on high school students. Two things that really stuck out to me, and these are high school students who are actually interested in teaching already. Like not, these are ones they're already thinking about becoming teachers. They said two things they gave like several, but two that really stuck out. One is their experience as students themselves. Some of them said, I can't imagine being the colleague of my current principal and teacher. And so you can imagine like you're in this place and like, I wouldn't want to work, talking about the student teacher, the student themselves are saying, like, I can't imagine working with this teacher, being in the teacher lounge with this teacher, being on the staff of this principal. I can't imagine. The other thing that they said they recognize and they're noticing is how educators of color are being treated in the school. And they're saying they're picking up on it. Things that we wouldn't necessarily like, oh, that person didn't get the promotion, or this person is spoken to in this kind of, negative way, or these biases, they're picking up on it. And again, these are students across the country, so not, in this kind of concentrated city or place or one system. This is across the country. They're saying, we see it, we recognize it. We don't want to be treated that way when we become adults. So I think the cultural proficiency levels impacts, the ecosystem.
And I want to piggyback. What Sharif mentioned about retention is huge, especially regionally in our area. As a superintendent, I don't want to go in and cherry pick quality teachers out of other districts. But I want to make sure that I'm retaining my staff and doing everything in my power that I have control over for teachers. For this profession was attractive for them to come in. What is it about my organization that keeps them wanting to stay in and not getting picked off and going somewhere else?
Can I just add regarding retention, if we want to retain people, we've got to create that, that well-being on the ground. So I just really think about being innovative. It's really hard to be innovative in the education system, right, with the way funding works and units and things like that. But everything that I see in here and think about for the past 5 years tells me that in every school building, there should be a counselor for the adults and a counselor for the children, okay? But that's a cost. And then there's the problem of pipeline of counselors coming in. Legislation's passed to put in more counselors and there's no one to fill those positions. But we have to think innovatively, I believe. And a lot of early year teachers come in and they are part of a mentoring program that is prescribed, that tells them they have to go to these meetings and read this book and do this, and then they're going to be mentored. And I think a menu approach, after people can articulate their vision of what it individually and personally means to be well, is an innovative way to go. So I'm a 14-year veteran. I don't need help with lesson planning and executing learning in my classroom. I might need help with other things. So I want to be able to articulate that, have that agency, and then have the resources and support. I don't want to go through a mentoring program that says, I'm going to do this, this, and this. It's a waste of time for me. And my biggest pet peeve is time. If you want me to teach, if you want me to be a master teacher and then feel good, so I will stay with you, take these other duties off my plate. If you want me to do a survey or send out notes or do this or that, let me have time to do it in my PLC or my staff meeting. Don't tell me I need to do it at home while I'm making dinner or anything else. Time is solid gold for me.
And that idea of innovation, so we looked at Linda Darling-Hammond and her group's research regarding professionalism, and we run a choice professional development model or professional learning model. The issue becomes more from the state for us because, well, Pennsylvania has to call it something different. We can't call it science of reading. We've been doing neuroscience work in our district for a number of years, but in Pennsylvania we call it structured literacy. So but we have these mandated trainings that have to come in. So we have suicide prevention, childhood abuse, we'll have structured literacy. We have different school safety items. And yet we're still trying to build a choice professional development model to take advantage of those things. So yesterday was primary in Pennsylvania, so it's an in-service day for us. So our choice model included something new because we try and keep throwing something in, and we have 4 units to a day, so everybody has to have 4 units filled. And one of the items that we chose was walking podcast. So we had a list of eligible podcasts that lasted the amount of time, and teachers could opt for walking podcast. And then even within that, they could choose which podcast they wanted to listen to. That was some of our toughest teachers responded, what a great opportunity, because it was a beautiful day yesterday. So what a great opportunity it was to do something like that as choice and building those pieces in to try and reflect, yeah, we're required to do certain things, but also that you have some efficacy and some agency on your own as a professional to choose something.
I might jump in for a second. I love, Wendy, what you were saying about the mental health support, the counselors for the adults. And some of the schools that are having some success with this, going back to yesterday, they've partnered with their community networks. So they're able to fund it that way. And at least one day a week, they'll have a counselor at the building or at the district and a floating sub. So you can schedule that session during the school day so you can have access to that level of support without straining your budget as well. But something else that Leanne brought up that I appreciated was this idea of voice and agency. I firmly believe that those closest to the problems are able to identify the better solutions. And one of our neighboring counties, one of the things they've implemented was this idea of having stay interviews. And so the whole idea is every year, as you work on your growth plan, you go through a stay interview. What does it take for you to stay with us? And that has been a wonderful opportunity for people to lift all these innovations that no one would have heard otherwise, to be able to retain people in the profession.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That's one of the slides I skipped over. We were starting to ask when people were asking us about recruitment, we would ask, what's your retention plan? And, I want to say, I forgot the number, the first 30 or 40 something districts, no one had a retention plan. And that was frustrating. So we just ended up just designing a toolkit. And the first thing that we looked at was, okay, what's the research? But all of it was back to the pipeline. It was kind of pretty generic of like, oh, you retain teachers this way, that way, this way. And they were like, okay, let's look at really get from the educators of color, what are they saying, whether they had left already or they were in it, what would actually encourage you to stay? And everyone's talking about reach. They're basically like feeling professionally respected, professionally fulfilled, and supported and effective. And so we're like, okay, so we designed a toolkit to help school leaders and principal supervisors. The principals are also complaining, my supervisor doesn't know jack. They're giving me feedback about the bulletin boards aren't updated, but not actually how to retain educators of color, right? And so we felt like, okay, school leadership team, so it's not just on the singular principal, how do you retain staff? And then who's supporting principals? Because as often as we're saying teachers aren't being supported, principal is actually singular. And teachers sometimes can find someone in the building, hopefully, often. A principal often has no one. If they don't have someone, there's no one. It is siloed, and so all the stress of teachers also concentrated in this decision-making body that, well, some of them say like they actually can't make decisions. They're just middle managers and implementing. But either way, they often don't have anyone. And the person that directly supports, there's also often, I don't want to say usually, but often we're hearing a strained relationship between them where that person is, not quite understanding of, I've only been out of the principalship for 5 years, and I feel like I would be ill-equipped to talk to them about how to directly navigate post-COVID around this kind of general thing. Specific things, pedagogical, yes, those kind of things, yeah. But I was like, I would have a huge blind spot as far as how do I support a principal right now post-COVID in the particular way that they may need outside of this, the PD and stuff that we're doing.
Thank you, guys. I heard a couple of conversations about floating subs and professional development. I think one of the strains that I feel as a rural principal is the sub shortage and being able to get substitutes in the building to be able to support my teachers with that professional development. I hear it from my colleagues. I had actually had a meeting with the Commissioner of Education on Monday of this week and heard from a lot of my colleagues across the state that they're experiencing the same. And so that's weighing on the mental health and the well-being of not only the teachers, but also those principals as they wake up at 6 a.m., 6:30 in the morning, and they're having to try to piecemeal and figure out what does this look like for the day? How can we get coverage? I know one of the days last week, we actually were down 4 substitute teachers, or we were down 4 teachers, didn't have any fillings in those classrooms. So trying to figure that piece out, not only to support our teachers, because in the California study, it was showcasing that that's the second biggest motivating factor is that professional development. But how do you give that time for them to exit the building when you know that you're going to be short on subs. So really, Leanne, Sham, and Wendy, if you guys see this within your districts, number one, and then number two, do you have any creative ways that you guys are utilizing to try to get subs into your buildings? I know, for example, I just looked at our hiring list. We have a lady that actually has been a longtime sub for us that is now applying for an aide position, which is fantastic. That's a great opportunity for us to be able to fill that. But now we're going to be down potentially another sub for next school year. So trying to figure some of those things out in a rural school has been a challenge.
When I do that, my substitute procurement secretary yells at me. You can't take them. Pennsylvania, we've been fortunate. Our Department of Ed has changed some of the rules and requirements. Once a college student in an education program gets 60 credits, they can sub in your district. So we fully know that May and June, the last Friday, Mondays become personal days for teachers, that we have a higher rate of absenteeism. But we know we have these college graduates that are coming out that are all eligible to sub. So we already have them on the sub list. And that's all part of our pipeline preparation. When those kids come home at college breaks, whether they be spring break or semester break, they're subbing for us. So really building that pipeline in as many ways as possible. And some of the non-traditional staff that we've been able to hire also because of Pennsylvania's changes in some of those rules, we've been able to put them into those, but we still have gaps. And when we have gaps and we don't have somebody to cover, at our high school, it's not as difficult because we're on a block schedule, so it's only 4 blocks, 3 teaching blocks that have to be covered. And teachers can choose to give up their entire prep period because our teachers either are teaching or preparing to teach. So they teach 3 blocks and their 4th block is a prep period. They can choose to have essentially the 90-minute time and take the full coverage, or they can choose to split it because they only want to give up 45 minutes, so we'll pay 2 teachers to split that block. So that's some of the things we've been doing to cover those subs.
Yeah, very similar. Sometimes I just have to split classes, worst case scenario. But Sunday night is how I know what kind of week I'll have. That's when you'll get all the emails, text messages, and everything. But we offer an extra bell supplement where if a teacher has like a planning bell or an extra bell, my teachers have basically 2 planning bells every day. Which is how we've set up the schedule. They can actually get paid to give back that bell and cover for another teacher, and a lot of them love that. If you didn't offer that compensation, different, but they love having it. The lessons are already prepared. When people submit a leave request or they say I'm not going to be in, they know they have to immediately attach a sub-plan or I don't see it. Like, that's where we are. So they know they'll have something there. My division, a lot of times because I only have 1 grade level, when it comes to what we're giving every school, my school doesn't get the same. But in this case, my division gave our school, just like all the other schools, 3 permanent substitutes. So my building is staffed with 3. Now, I've had to replace, honestly, 2 of them in this school year, but it was a quick turnaround. So I have that also to lean on. And then the fuzzies. So my substitutes that actually come in the building, if you come, you get a swag bag out of this world. Because it is going to be just those conversations that they have out in the community that actually help us to get people to come back in. Yeah, they want to come back and who doesn't want a swag bag from Bayside 6? So, that's kind of where we are. But we have the same challenges, but it's one of those things as a principal, you'll feel like, oh my goodness, but then you'll talk to another principal and you're like, oh, I'm glad that's not my issue. Like, I met another principal and he said that he's had 22 vacancies all school year and 17 of them have never been filled. So I was like, I'll take my 2 classes and my situation and I'll lift you up in prayer. Because you always have those things, but it's still definitely a challenge for sure.
Do you feel like that weighs on your teachers going in and giving up their prep period, their planning period over time? I know we have teachers that love that because they love the extra pay.
Yes.
But I also see that by the time we get to April and May, it is really weighing.
Yeah, I would say no, because it's not something that we go around asking people. They know it's just there, and if you want to do it, you can. And my teachers, honestly, they don't teach their first content class until fourth bell. They have so many bells off. I even have third bell tutoring, which is just really free and open, and so it's the easy morning that leads into the real thing. So, I mean, it's completely up to them, but I would imagine probably over a long period of time, maybe, but it's their choice. And I've never been in a situation where I've had to go to a teacher and say, I need you to do this for me. Like, it's always like, do you have any classes that you need covered today? It's those kind of conversations in the morning. And you'll typically see it's pretty much like the same teachers that want to do those kind of things, but when we talk about compensation, teachers are looking for ways to make extra money, whether it's through an additional job or, like I said, tutoring. And I've even added in virtual tutoring just so teachers could be home with their families and still be able to make more money and help our kids. Like, we're finding all of these creative ways to help them, but at the same time, we don't always have all of that extra funding. So we're doing what we can.
In my elementary school, we're really fortunate. We have 2 full-time building subs, and so those are funded. And it's a really great way to bring community to the elementary school. So one of them is the grandmother of a current 4th grade student, and she told me my class is her favorite. So every time I leave, I say, "Can Ms. Lamar please come work for my class?" Another one is the mom of one of my students. So you see these people in the hallway, they have relationships with the kids, and that really helps things if you have the funding available for it. The other thing is that I take method students every spring and fall, and I ask them to just get cleared through Kelly Subs when they leave. When I left the classroom for a year, I had to get certified as a sub. It was incredibly expensive and time consuming. I thought to myself, if you don't have a vehicle or if money is tight, you cannot do this. So it really opened my eyes. So the kids that are coming through your methods teaching or student teaching programs, they've done all the clearances to be in the school in the first place, so that's a wise place to go, and they need money. And then the other thing is that when I was a sub, it was hard. Like, I cried. And I'm a veteran teacher. It was awful. And I said, we should have swag bags in the office. Here's your kind bar and your water and your welcome mascot for whatever school. And then the other thing is I think we need to talk to kids directly about how can you make someone want to come back to this place? What are the things that you do and say? And have kids develop norms for subs, because part of the reason it was so hard for me is I walked into a classroom and I was warm and I told kids I used to be a teacher and I was energetic and fun, and they just ate me for breakfast, right? They were not interested. So I think you have to actually talk in and around your school very directly about this with the kids, because they're the ones that are subs are spending the most time with, and they can help make subs want to come back. It's answering that question, how can we make people want to come back?
Do we have time for one more? Okay, one more question. I think, can,
Hi, I'm curious. Doris Santoro has a line of work where she says, let's not call it burnout. It goes far deeper than that. It's demoralization. Our teachers, they care about their kids. They want to do it best, but they can't provide the kind of services the kids need. And I live in Chicago, so especially this last year, I've seen teachers try to find housing or food and sources. And I'm just curious about your reaction to that, and what can we do to really fix that if that is the case?
I have a rule in my district, and I think people after this amount of time have finally caught on. I don't give things names. So I look at burnout as a name, but it's also how things kind of get leverage and move forward. So Dr. Candy Wien's, just her book, I think, just came out yesterday. It's called Burnout Immunity, and I've had the opportunity to spend some time with her. And she looked at this work, and a lot of her research was really developed working with CEOs of major hospitals. And those high-demand, high-stress positions, and now she's migrating into the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania looking at this. And she said she kind of was a numbers person to begin with, and she talked about, once I was able to put it into a formula, that burnout is essentially when your demands are greater than your resources, that capacity that you have. And so looking at from kind of, again, another name of something, your EQ from that perspective. It really goes back to a lot of things I've heard really yesterday and today, looking at connectedness, because that's not just about students, it's about adults as well. Community and trust, and that sense of community within your organization. And then today, talking about, how do we build these network and pieces in so people feel that this job is attractive, not only to enter, but to stay in. When I look at burnout, and this year it was a budgetary approach as well, we offered a voluntary separation incentive plan. We already had an early retirement incentive policy in place. And we had 132 teachers that are eligible, because I can't speak to the salary point because we have a very attractive salary table in our district. And I have over 50% of my staff are at maximum, which this year is $115,000. So when we offered this, we had 132 people that were eligible. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting to see how many people take advantage, because the bottom line is they'll get 75% of their salary for the next 5 years by not working. And of the 132, we only had 14 people. But part of the reason why I wanted to move forward with this is because I did see that issue of concern. Like, there were some of, my great classroom teachers that I could see, they were maxed out. And so we gave them the opportunity to actually take a step back and reflect. And I don't think we give people enough time to pause and be reflective about their profession and what they're doing so that they can make a good, healthy decision. And I think that's a key piece, that reflective piece is huge when it comes to our profession, that we need to do more of.
Can I just add along the lines of innovation? When I left the classroom, I stepped away and I realized I wanted to come back. I didn't need to leave forever. I needed a break. So an innovative idea may be to have a rotation program. Okay, so some teachers will benefit by rotating out to district office or to a state fellowship. When I left, I lost all my sick days, over 40, and I lost my seniority. In Delaware, you go to referendum for funding. You can't just raise your taxes. So if our referendum hadn't passed in February, despite my 12 years of service, I would have been the first one laid off in May because I was at the bottom of the seniority roster again. So a rotation program is going to preserve all of those benefits and things you've worked very hard for, and it allows people to perhaps experience other roles that will point them back to the classroom or say, hey, no, I'd like to go out and do this. So I think, again, we've got to think innovatively, and we can't discount that. So just another thought.
If I may, just piggybacking on that. So I think demoralization is the right word, or demoralizing, if you will. I was just reading about this. The MIT Sloan Journal just published a great paper on what happened with nurses post-COVID. And I think there's a parallel there, right? So most of you have probably heard that the stress levels for educators right now are on par with nurses in healthcare. The difference is, when we went through COVID, there was this wave of hope for educators, because all of a sudden, everyone had to take care of their own kids. And on top of that, they had to teach their own kids too. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. We had friends with third grade kids crying because they didn't know how to teach third grade content, right? That's not what they went to school for. So there was this national wave of hope that finally we're going to be seen. Finally, things are going to change. And then everyone was allowed to go back, and the conversation absolutely died. Nurses went through the same situation, except their conditions changed dramatically to the point where, well, I won't go there, but they changed dramatically, right? And nurses were able to get much better benefit packages, rotations, all kinds of other incentives to retain them, because many of them were leaving too. And I think we missed an opportunity there that we need to go back to. There was an inflection point where we could have changed education in the United States. I think there's still an openness to that if we take the opportunity.
Okay, and can I say one quick thing? I'll say something that should be obvious but isn't obvious to everyone, which is, as a society, we should not be attacking public school teachers, but supporting them. I'll just leave it at that.
Can I just add, just as a building administrator, I think my role in all of that is just to make sure that my teachers understand their role. I think it's a constant joke when people say teachers wear all of these hats. They're a nurse, they're a mom, they're a dad. That's not okay. And so I think as a building administrator, I have to let them know you're here to teach. And so I have teachers, sometimes you'll find out, and I know other people will have the same story. You'll find out you have teachers who are buying clothes for children and no, you don't have to do that. So a lot of that worry comes from those things that they do beyond actually teaching. And so what I do, and along with my administrative team, we sit down with our teachers at the beginning of the year and we come up with their professional development plan based on their individual goals. I think a lot of that is, where do I go from here, and am I supported in that path or in that journey? So I just think it's really learning more about your teachers and having the time to do that. And then we'll talk about the non-traditional ones another time. But yeah.
So, can we all thank our panelists and presenters?